The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone corridors of Windsor Castle as Royal Protection Officer James Mitchell adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. 23 years of service had taught him to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing. His polished boots echoed softly against the ancient floors as he made his rounds through the private wing of the castle. James had protected 3 generations of royals. He remembered when Prince William was just a boy running through these same halls, and now he watched over William's own children. Princess Charlotte, at 8 years old, had become particularly dear to him. Her bright smile and curious questions about his job always brightened his day. She reminded him of his own daughter, who was about the same age. The castle felt different lately. There was tension in the air that even the youngest staff members could sense. Whispered conversations stopped when certain people entered rooms. Schedules changed without explanation. James had learned to read the subtle signs of royal drama, and something significant was brewing. As he rounded the corner near the Queen Consort's private study, James noticed the door was slightly ajar. This was unusual, as Camilla typically kept her personal meetings completely private. He slowed his pace not out of curiosity, but because protocol demanded he be aware of any security risks. An open door could mean anything from a forgotten latch to a potential threat. The sound of voices drifted through the gap. James recognized Camilla's distinctive tone immediately, but there was something sharp about it that made him pause. He positioned himself at the appropriate distance to maintain security, while respecting privacy, but the acoustics of the old castle carried voices farther than most people realized. "She's becoming too popular," Camilla's voice was saying. "The press follows her everywhere. Every event she attends overshadows the adults. It's not appropriate for a child to have such prominence." James felt his jaw tighten. They were talking about Princess Charlotte. He had seen the recent media coverage himself. The young princess had indeed captured public attention with her confident wave at a charity event and her sweet interaction with children at a hospital visit. The newspapers had called her the People's Princess in training. Another voice responded, one James recognized as Camilla's private secretary, Margaret Thornfield. "What would you suggest, Your Majesty?" "The events are already planned, and the Princess of Wales has approved Charlotte's participation." There was a pause, and James found himself holding his breath. Something about the silence felt ominous. "I think it's time Charlotte stepped back from public engagements," Camilla said, her voice cold and calculated. "For her own good, of course. Children should be protected from too much public attention. I'll be speaking with the king about limiting her appearances significantly." James felt his heart sink. He knew what this really meant. Charlotte loved her public duties. She talked about them constantly, asking him about the people she would meet and the places she would visit. The little girl found joy in making others happy, just like her late grandmother Diana had. "And if the Prince and Princess of Wales object?" Margaret asked carefully. Camilla's laugh was brittle. "They'll understand when I explain how damaging this attention could be to Charlotte's development. And if they don't, well, the king makes the final decisions about royal duties. William may be heir to the throne, but I am Queen Consort now." The words hit James like a physical blow. He had served the royal family with absolute loyalty, but this felt different. This wasn't about protocol or tradition. This was about a woman using her position to diminish a child, out of what seemed like jealousy or insecurity. James thought about Charlotte's excitement just yesterday when she learned about an upcoming visit to a children's hospital. She had asked him if he thought the sick children would like the books she planned to bring them. Her genuine care and natural charisma were already showing signs of the same qualities that had made Diana beloved worldwide. "When will you speak to His Majesty about this?" Margaret inquired. "Today," Camilla replied firmly. "I want this handled immediately. Charlotte's schedule should be cleared of all public engagements within the week. She can focus on her studies and private family time instead." James felt his hands clench into fists. In his years of service, he had maintained perfect professional composure, even in the most challenging situations. He had protected royals from actual threats, managed security during international incidents, and kept family secrets that could have changed history. But this was different. This wasn't protecting someone from harm. This was causing harm to a child who had done nothing wrong except be herself. The conversation in the study continued with Camilla outlining her plan in detail. She intended to present it as a caring gesture, protecting Charlotte from the pressures of public life. But James could hear the calculation in her voice, the way she planned to manipulate the situation to her advantage. As the meeting concluded and he heard chairs moving, James quickly resumed his patrol route. His mind was racing as he walked. What could he do? His position required absolute discretion and loyalty to all members of the royal family. But what happened when loyalty to one member meant allowing injustice to another? He thought about Charlotte's trusting smile, her excited questions about their next public engagement, her genuine concern for others despite her young age. Then he thought about Camilla's cold calculation and the pain this would cause not just Charlotte, but William and Catherine as well. James had always prided himself on following orders without question. But as he continued his rounds through the castle corridors, he realized that some situations demanded more than blind obedience. Sometimes protecting the royal family meant protecting them from themselves. The weight of what he had overheard settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. In a few hours, Camilla would meet with King Charles, and Charlotte's future would be decided without her parents even knowing what was happening. The little girl who brought sunshine to everyone she met was about to have that light dimmed by political maneuvering and adult jealousy. James stopped walking and looked out one of the tall castle windows. In the distance, he could see the gardens where Charlotte often played with her brothers. Soon those might be the only places the public would see her. The thought made his stomach turn. He knew he had to make a choice, and he had to make it quickly. James Mitchell walked through the castle gardens, his mind churning with impossible decisions. The weight of what he had overheard pressed down on him like a stone. In all his years of service, he had never faced a situation where his loyalty to the crown conflicted so directly with his sense of right and wrong. He found himself near the rose garden, where Princess Charlotte often played with her brothers. Just yesterday, she had shown him a butterfly she had found there, carefully cupping it in her small hands before releasing it back to the flowers. Her gentleness and natural curiosity reminded him so much of the stories older guards told about Princess Diana. The sound of approaching footsteps made James turn. Prince William was walking toward him, still dressed in his morning exercise clothes. The Prince of Wales looked tired, and James wondered if he was already sensing the storm that was about to hit his family. "Good morning, James," William said with his usual friendly nod. "Everything quiet today?" James felt his throat tighten. "Yes, sir. All secure." The words felt like lies in his mouth. Nothing was secure if Camilla succeeded in her plan. William paused beside him, looking out over the gardens. "Charlotte's been asking about next week's hospital visit. She's been practicing her handwriting to sign the books she wants to give the children. She's quite excited about it." The knife in James's chest twisted deeper. That hospital visit was exactly the kind of engagement Camilla planned to cancel. He watched William's face, seeing the genuine pride and love there. This was a father who delighted in his daughter's compassion and growing confidence in her royal role. "She has a natural way with people," James managed to say. "She does." William smiled. "Catherine and I are so proud of how she's handling her public duties. She reminds me of my mother sometimes, the way she connects with people so easily." The comparison to Diana hung in the air between them. James wondered if that was exactly what Camilla feared. The ghost of the people's princess lived on in her granddaughter, and perhaps that threatened the current queen consort's position in ways James was only beginning to understand. After William left to continue his morning routine, James found himself walking toward the administrative wing of the castle. He needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to handle what he knew. The corridors here were quieter, used mainly by staff and advisors rather than the royal family themselves. As he turned a corner, he nearly collided with Lady Susan Hartwell, one of the Queen's longtime ladies-in-waiting. Susan had served the late Queen Elizabeth for over 30 years and was known for her absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty to the crown. "James," she said, steadying herself with a slight smile. "Careful there. You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." Something in her tone made James look at her more carefully. Lady Susan was in her 70s with silver hair always perfectly arranged and eyes that missed nothing. She had navigated decades of royal politics and family drama with grace and wisdom. "Just thinking about security protocols, my lady," James replied carefully. Lady Susan studied his face with those sharp eyes. "I see. Well, sometimes the greatest threats to this family don't come from outside these walls, do they? The words hit James like a lightning bolt. Did she know something? Was she testing him? In the complex web of royal household politics, Lady Susan was known for her ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. I'm not sure I follow, my lady. Lady Susan glanced around the empty corridor, then stepped closer. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I've been in this household long enough to recognize when something is brewing. There are conversations happening in quiet corners, schedules being discussed that haven't been announced, tensions that feel familiar. James felt his pulse quicken. Familiar how? I served during some difficult times, Lady Susan said carefully. Times when family members had different ideas about what was best for the monarchy. Times when personal feelings got mixed up with royal duty. It rarely ended well for anyone involved. The older woman paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Sometimes, James, the people who truly serve this family best are the ones who speak up when they see something wrong, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. Before James could respond, Lady Susan continued walking down the corridor, leaving him standing alone with his racing thoughts. Her words felt like both an invitation and a warning. But an invitation to what? And a warning about what consequences? James spent the rest of the morning going through the motions of his duties, while his mind worked frantically. He checked security reports, coordinated with other protection officers, and maintained his usual professional demeanor. But underneath, he was building toward a decision that could change everything. During his lunch break, James called his wife Sarah from his private phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Hello, love. How's your day going? James found himself struggling for words. Sarah, if you knew something that could hurt a child but speaking up about it might cost you your job, what would you do? There was silence on the other end of the line. Sarah knew better than to ask for details about his work, but she also knew her husband well enough to recognize real distress in his voice. James, in all the years I've known you, you've never put your job before doing what's right. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. If a child is at risk, I know what you'll do, regardless of the cost. Her words hit him with stunning clarity. Sarah was right. He had spent his entire career protecting people, and that included protecting them from each other when necessary. After hanging up, James sat in his small office and opened his laptop. He began typing a carefully worded email, then deleted it. He started again, deleted it again. How do you report on a conversation you weren't supposed to hear? How do you challenge a queen consort without ending your career and potentially making things worse? Then he remembered something Lady Susan had said about speaking up when you see something wrong. Maybe he wasn't the only one who had concerns about what was happening. Maybe there were others in the household who had noticed the same patterns, the same tensions. James made a decision. Instead of trying to handle this alone, he would test the waters carefully. He would reach out to other senior staff members, people he trusted, people who had served the family for years. If there was a pattern of concerning behavior, others would have noticed it too. He started with Detective Chief Inspector Paul Morrison, head of Royal Protection. Paul had been with the family almost as long as James and had a reputation for putting the safety and well-being of the royals above everything else. Paul, James said when he found him in the security office. Do you have a minute? I need to discuss something sensitive. Paul looked up from his reports, immediately focused. What's going on? James chose his words carefully. Have you noticed any unusual tension in the household lately? Any changes in scheduling or protocol that seem motivated by personal rather than security concerns? Paul's expression grew serious. Why do you ask? Because I think we might have a situation developing that could impact the well-being of the family, particularly the children. The two men looked at each other across the desk, years of shared service and mutual respect passing between them. Paul closed the door to his office and gestured for James to sit down. Tell me what you've observed, Paul said quietly. James took a deep breath and began to speak. Detective Chief Inspector Paul Morrison listened intently as James recounted what he had overheard in Camilla's study. Paul's expression grew darker with each detail, his fingers drumming silently on his desk as he processed the implications. This is serious, James, Paul said when the account was finished. If what you heard is accurate, we're looking at a deliberate attempt to undermine the Prince and Princess of Wales's parental authority regarding their own children. James felt a wave of relief that Paul was taking him seriously, but also a growing fear about what this might mean for all of them. What do we do? I can't pretend I didn't hear it, but I also can't directly confront the Queen Consort without proof. Paul stood and walked to his window, looking out at the castle grounds where tourists gathered beyond the gates. The thing is, James, this isn't the first concerning report I've received about the Queen Consort's behavior toward the Wales children, particularly Charlotte. James felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? Last month I had a conversation with Lady Margaret Thorne, Charlotte's tutor. She mentioned that there had been several instances where events planned for Charlotte were suddenly cancelled or modified without explanation. When she asked the Princess of Wales about it, Catherine seemed surprised and said she hadn't authorized any changes. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was deeply troubling. How many incidents are we talking about? Paul pulled out a file from his desk drawer. I started keeping informal notes when I began noticing patterns. There was the cancelled visit to the children's charity in September, the modified schedule for the Commonwealth Day events, and the sudden decision to reduce Charlotte's participation in the Jubilee celebrations. James thought back over the past few months, remembering Charlotte's disappointment when various events she had been excited about were suddenly changed or cancelled. At the time, he had assumed it was just the normal complications of royal scheduling. Now he saw it differently. Paul, if this has been going on for months, why hasn't anyone spoken up before now? The older man sighed heavily. Because accusations against a queen consort are incredibly serious. We needed to be absolutely certain we weren't misreading normal scheduling adjustments. But what you overheard today confirms a deliberate pattern. There was a knock at the door and both men tensed. Paul called for whoever it was to enter, and Lady Susan Hartwell stepped into the room. James felt his heart skip a beat, wondering if his earlier conversation with her had been a trap. Gentlemen, Lady Susan said, closing the door behind her. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I believe we need to have a conversation. Paul and James exchanged glances. Lady Susan's presence could either be a blessing or a disaster, depending on where her loyalties lay. Lady Susan, Paul said carefully, what can we help you with? The elderly woman took a seat without being invited, her posture straight and her expression serious. I think the question is what I can help you with. I've been watching and listening for several weeks now, and I believe we all have concerns about the same situation. James felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I'm not sure what you mean, Lady Susan smiled slightly. James, dear boy, I've been navigating royal politics since before you were born. I know when people are having difficult conversations about difficult topics. Your body language this morning told me everything I needed to know. She turned to Paul. And you, Chief Inspector, have been asking very careful questions around the household lately. Questions about schedules, about decision-making processes, about who has authority over what. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's troubling you. Paul leaned forward. Lady Susan, if you have information relevant to this situation, we need to hear it. I have more than information, she replied. I have documentation. You see, gentlemen, I learned long ago that in this household it's wise to keep detailed records of unusual events. One never knows when patterns might emerge that require attention. She opened her handbag and withdrew a leather portfolio. For the past 4 months, I have been documenting instances where decisions affecting the Wales children were made without proper consultation with their parents. I initially thought it might be administrative confusion, but the pattern became too clear to ignore. James stared at the portfolio as if it contained explosives. What kind of documentation? Emails that were sent and then recalled, schedule changes that were made and then explained away, conversations I overheard between staff members who thought they were speaking privately. All of it pointing to a systematic effort to reduce Princess Charlotte's public profile. Paul reached for the portfolio, but Lady Susan held it back. Before I share this with you, I need to know what you intend to do with the information. This is not a game, gentlemen. What we're talking about could tear this family apart. The weight of the moment settled on all three of them. James realized they had reached a point of no return. Whatever they decided to do next would have consequences that rippled far beyond this room. Lady Susan, James said slowly, what you're describing isn't just family politics. It's a deliberate campaign against a child. Whatever the risks, we can't let that continue. Paul nodded in agreement. Our duty is to protect all members of the royal family, including from each other when necessary. If Princess Charlotte is being targeted in this way, we have an obligation to act. Lady Susan studied both men for a long moment, then handed over the portfolio. Very well, but we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. The wrong approach could make things much worse for Charlotte and her parents. Paul opened the portfolio and began reading. James watched his face grow pale as he absorbed the contents. Page after page of documented incidents, carefully noted times and dates, witness accounts from staff members who had noticed unusual patterns. This is extensive, Paul said quietly, and damning. The pattern is unmistakable. Lady Susan nodded grimly. It gets worse. I have reason to believe that today's conversation James overheard was just the beginning. The Queen Consort is planning to take this directly to His Majesty this afternoon. James felt panic rising in his chest. Then we have to act now. Once she speaks to the king, it might be too late to stop this. Not necessarily, Lady Susan said thoughtfully. The king is many things, but he's not unreasonable. However, he tends to avoid family conflicts when possible. If Camilla presents this as protecting Charlotte from media pressure, he might approve it just to avoid a confrontation. Paul was still reading through the documentation, unless he has all the facts, unless he understands what's really happening here. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, each understanding the magnitude of what they were contemplating. They were preparing to challenge a queen consort, to go over her head to the king himself, to risk their careers and reputations for the sake of an 8-year-old princess. There's something else, Lady Susan said quietly. Princess Catherine has noticed some of these changes. She mentioned to me last week that she felt like she was losing control over her own children's schedules. She's starting to ask questions. James thought about William's comments in the garden that morning, his obvious pride and Charlotte's growing confidence in her royal role. The Prince of Wales doesn't know yet, does he? I don't believe so, Lady Susan replied. But he will soon. And when he finds out that decisions about his daughter were being made behind his back, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Paul closed the portfolio and looked at his companions. We have a choice to make. We can document this and report it through normal channels, which might take weeks and give Camilla time to consolidate her position. Or we can take more direct action. What kind of direct action? James asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lady Susan straightened in her chair, and for a moment James could see the steel that had helped her navigate decades of royal service. We go to His Majesty before Camilla does. We present him with the facts and let him make an informed decision about his granddaughter's future. The plan was audacious and risky. It could save Charlotte's public role and protect her family's rights. Or it could destroy all of their careers and potentially make the situation worse. James thought about Charlotte's excited questions about her upcoming hospital visit, about her careful practice of signing her name in the book she wanted to give to sick children. He thought about his own daughter and what he would want someone to do if she were in Charlotte's position. When do we approach the king? He asked. Lady Susan checked her elegant gold watch, her face grave with the weight of their decision. His Majesty typically takes his afternoon tea in his private study at 3 o'clock. It's now 1:30. That gives us very little time to prepare. But if we wait until tomorrow, it may be too late. Paul Morrison gathered the documentation into a neat stack, his police training evident in how methodically he organized the evidence. We need to approach this professionally. This isn't gossip or speculation anymore. We have documented evidence of a pattern of behavior that affects the well-being of a minor member of the royal family. James felt his hands sweating despite the cool castle air. In 23 years of service, he had never imagined himself in a situation like this. What exactly do we tell him? How do we explain why we're bringing this to his attention? With complete honesty, Lady Susan replied firmly. King Charles may have his flaws, but he loves his grandchildren deeply. When he understands what's been happening to Charlotte, he'll want to protect her. The three conspirators spent the next hour carefully planning their approach. They would request a brief audience with the king on a matter of urgent family security. Paul would present the documented evidence as head of royal protection. Lady Susan would provide historical context from her decades of service, and James would give his first-hand account of what he had overheard. At 2:45, they made their way through the castle corridors toward the king's private study. James had walked these halls thousands of times, but today each step felt monumental. They were about to challenge the queen consort directly, and there would be no going back. Lady Susan knocked gently on the study door. A voice called for them to enter, and they found King Charles seated at his desk, reviewing papers while classical music played softly in the background. He looked up with mild surprise at the unusual group seeking his attention. "Lady Susan, Chief Inspector Morrison, Officer Mitchell," the king said, setting down his pen. "This is unexpected. Please sit down. What brings you all here together?" Lady Susan took the lead, her voice steady and respectful. "Your Majesty, we've come to you with information about a situation that we believe requires your immediate attention. It concerns Princess Charlotte and decisions that are being made about her public duties." The king's expression shifted, becoming more focused. "Charlotte, is there a security concern?" Paul stepped forward, his police background evident in his direct approach. "Sir, we have documented evidence of a pattern of behavior that suggests someone has been systematically reducing Princess Charlotte's public engagements without the knowledge or consent of the Prince and Princess of Wales." King Charles frowned, leaning back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation. Who exactly are you suggesting is responsible for this?" The moment of truth had arrived. James felt his mouth go dry, but Lady Susan's voice remained calm and clear. "Your Majesty, the evidence points to the Queen Consort." The silence that followed was deafening. King Charles stared at the three of them, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and growing concern. James could practically hear his own heartbeat in the quiet room. "That's a very serious allegation," the king said slowly. "I assume you have substantial evidence to support such a claim." Paul placed the portfolio on the king's desk. "We do, sir. 4 months of documented incidents, witness statements, and today, Officer Mitchell overheard a conversation that confirms a deliberate plan to remove Princess Charlotte from her scheduled public duties." King Charles opened the portfolio and began reading. As he absorbed the contents, his face grew pale, then flushed with what appeared to be growing anger. The classical music continued to play softly. "A surreal soundtrack to the unfolding crisis, James," the king said without looking up from the documents. "Tell me exactly what you heard today." James recounted the conversation in Camilla's study, his voice steady despite his racing heart. He repeated the words as accurately as possible, watching the king's expression grow darker with each detail. When James finished, King Charles closed the portfolio and sat back in his chair. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, the king spoke. "Are you telling me that the Queen Consort has been making decisions about my granddaughter's public duties without consulting William and Catherine?" "Yes, sir," Paul replied. "And based on the conversation Officer Mitchell overheard, she plans to formalize this by requesting that you officially reduce Charlotte's public role." King Charles stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. James could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of the revelation settling upon him. "When is Camilla supposed to speak with me about this?" Lady Susan checked her watch again. "According to what Officer Mitchell overheard, sometime today. It could be at any moment." The king turned back to face them, and James was struck by how much older he looked than when they had entered the room just minutes earlier. "Do William and Catherine know about any of this?" "We don't believe so, sir," Lady Susan replied. "Princess Catherine has noticed some unusual changes to Charlotte's schedule, but she doesn't appear to understand the pattern or the source." King Charles returned to his desk and picked up his phone. "I need to speak with my son immediately, and I want the Queen Consort's appointment with me today cancelled." As the king made his calls, James felt a mixture of relief and terror. They had presented their case, and the king was taking action. But what would happen next? How would Camilla react when she discovered that her plan had been exposed? How would this affect the entire royal family? Within minutes, there was a knock at the study door. Prince William entered, still dressed in his casual afternoon clothes, his face showing confusion and concern. "Father, your call sounded urgent. Is everything all right?" King Charles gestured for his son to sit down, then handed him the portfolio. "William, I need you to read this, and then I need you to tell me what you and Catherine know about changes to Charlotte's public schedule." James watched William's face as he read through the documentation. The prince's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to barely contained fury. When he finished reading, he looked up at his father with eyes that blazed with protective anger. "Someone has been manipulating my daughter's schedule behind our backs?" William's voice was dangerously quiet. "Someone has been making decisions about my child without consulting Catherine and me?" "According to this evidence, yes," King Charles replied. "And that someone is Camilla." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Where is she? Where is Camilla? Before anyone could answer, there was another knock at the door. James felt his blood freeze as he recognized the voice that called out. Charles, I'm here for our appointment. It was Camilla. King Charles looked at the group assembled in his study, then at his son, whose face was a mask of controlled rage. Send her in, he called out. The door opened and Queen Consort Camilla entered with her usual confident stride. She stopped short when she saw the unexpected gathering, her eyes immediately going to the portfolio on the king's desk. I wasn't expecting a group meeting, she said carefully, her politician's instincts clearly sensing danger. King Charles stood, his posture formal and imposing. Camilla, we need to discuss Princess Charlotte's public duties. I understand you have some concerns about her level of public engagement. Camilla glanced around the room again, her eyes lingering on James with what looked like growing suspicion. Yes, I do have concerns. I think Charlotte is being exposed to too much public attention for a child her age. It's not healthy. William stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Funny thing, Camilla. Catherine and I don't recall being consulted about concerns regarding our own daughter. The confrontation was about to begin, and James realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in King Charles's study was thick enough to cut with a knife. Camilla's confident expression began to crack as she realized she had walked into a trap. Her eyes darted between the portfolio on the desk, William's furious face, and the 3 staff members who had clearly been talking. I'm not sure what this is about, Camilla said, attempting to maintain her composure. But I think there may be some misunderstanding. William stepped closer to his stepmother, his voice dangerously low. The only misunderstanding is how you thought you could manipulate my daughter's life without Catherine and me finding out about it. King Charles held up his hand for silence, his own anger barely contained but more controlled than his son's. Camilla, before we continue, I think you should know that we have extensive documentation of changes made to Charlotte's schedule over the past 4 months. Changes that were made without consulting the Princess of Wales. Camilla's face went pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. Those were administrative adjustments made in Charlotte's best interests. The child was being overexposed to media attention. Someone needed to protect her. Someone. William's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. Her parents, perhaps? The people who actually have the right to make decisions about her welfare? Lady Susan stepped forward slightly, her decades of experience in royal protocol evident in her measured tone. Your Majesty, if I may. The changes made to Princess Charlotte's schedule were not administrative adjustments. They were deliberate alterations made without proper authorization and, in many cases, without the knowledge of the Princess of Wales until after the fact. Camilla's eyes flashed with anger. And who are you to question decisions made for the good of this family? Your staff. You don't make policy decisions about royal duties. The words hit Lady Susan like a slap, but her expression didn't change. James felt his own anger rising at the dismissive treatment of someone who had served the royal family with distinction for decades. King Charles's voice cut through the rising tension. Camilla, Lady Susan has been a trusted advisor to this family for over 30 years. Her observations carry significant weight, as do those of Chief Inspector Morrison and Officer Mitchell. For the first time, Camilla's gaze fixed on James with obvious suspicion. Officer Mitchell, what exactly is your role in this? Intervention? James felt every eye in the room on him. This was the moment he had been dreading, when his surveillance of the Queen Consort would be revealed. But looking at William's protective fury and thinking about Charlotte's innocent excitement about helping sick children, he found his voice. I overheard your conversation this morning, Your Majesty, in your study, with your private secretary, about your plans to have Princess Charlotte removed from all public engagements. The color drained completely from Camilla's face. You were listening to my private conversations? I was doing my job, James replied firmly, ensuring the security of all family members, including protecting them from threats to their well-being, regardless of where those threats originate. William turned to James with a mixture of gratitude and horror. What exactly did you hear? James took a deep breath and repeated the conversation once more, this time with Camilla standing right there. As he spoke, he watched her expressions cycle through denial, anger, and finally a calculating coldness that was somehow more frightening than her rage. When James finished, the silence was deafening. Camilla straightened her shoulders and looked directly at King Charles, ignoring everyone else in the room. Charles, you cannot seriously be taking the word of household staff over your own wife. This is clearly a coordinated attack on my position and authority in this family. Your authority? William's voice was incredulous. What authority do you have over my children? You're not their grandmother. You're not their guardian. You have no legal or familial right to make decisions about their lives. Camilla's mask finally slipped completely. I am queen consort of this realm. I have a responsibility to protect the reputation and dignity of the monarchy. Charlotte's constant media attention is creating unrealistic expectations and overshadowing the work of senior royals. The truth was finally out in the open. This wasn't about protecting Charlotte at all. This was about jealousy, about a stepmother who couldn't bear to see her husband's granddaughter receiving the kind of positive attention that had made Diana global icon King Charles had been, listening to this exchange with growing horror. Now he stood up, his face flushed with anger that James had never seen before. Camilla, are you telling me that you have been undermining my son's parental authority because you're jealous of an 8-year-old child? That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said, William interjected. You just admitted that Charlotte's popularity bothers you enough that you've been sabotaging her public duties for months. Paul Morrison had remained silent throughout the confrontation, but now he stepped forward with the authority of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement. Your Majesty, he said to King Charles, what we have here is a clear pattern of unauthorized interference with the welfare of a minor royal family member. In any other context, this would be considered a form of harassment or manipulation. Camilla whirled on him. How dare you speak to me that way? I could have you dismissed immediately. Actually, King Charles said quietly, you couldn't. The royal protection officers report to me, not to you. And based on what I've heard today, I'm extremely grateful that they brought this to my attention. Lady Susan, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke again. Your Majesty, if I may suggest, this situation requires immediate correction. Princess Charlotte has public engagements scheduled for next week that she is very excited about. The children at the hospital are expecting her visit. Those visits will proceed as planned, King Charles said firmly. And Camilla, let me be absolutely clear. You will have no further input into the scheduling or duties of William's children. Those decisions rest with their parents, as they should have all along. Camilla's face twisted with rage and humiliation. Charles, you cannot seriously be choosing them over me. Over your own wife. The king looked at her with something that might have been sadness. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else, Camilla. I'm protecting my granddaughter from behavior that is completely inappropriate and damaging. What you've done goes against everything this family stands for. William moved closer to his father, his voice still tight with emotion but showing gratitude. Thank you, Father. Catherine is going to be devastated when she learns how long this has been going on without us knowing. Where is Catherine now? King Charles asked. She's with the children. Charlotte was asking her about the book she wants to take to the hospital next week. William's voice cracked slightly. She has no idea that someone was trying to take that away from her. James felt tears prick at his eyes thinking about Charlotte's innocent excitement. How close she had come to having her natural compassion and growing confidence crushed by adult jealousy and politics. Camilla made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Charles, this will leak to the press. The staff involved cannot be trusted to keep quiet about family business. Think about the damage to the monarchy. Lady Susan's voice was ice cold when she responded. Your Majesty, in 30 years of service to this family, I have never once leaked information to the press. The suggestion that I would start now is deeply insulting. Paul Morrison nodded in agreement. The protection officers take confidentiality extremely seriously. Our concern is solely for the well-being of the family members we serve. James found his own voice. I have children of my own, Your Majesty. I would never do anything to harm Princess Charlotte or any member of this family. That's exactly why I had to speak up. King Charles looked at each of the staff members who had risked their careers to protect his granddaughter. I want you all to know how grateful I am for your courage in bringing this to my attention. The royal family owes you a debt of gratitude. Camilla realized she had lost completely. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, but she managed to keep her voice level. I see that my position in this family has been made quite clear. I'll be retiring to my private apartments. As she moved toward the door, William called out, Camilla. She stopped but didn't turn around. "If you ever try to interfere with my children again in any way, the consequences will be far more serious than what happened here today." She left without responding, the door closing behind her with a soft click that somehow felt like a thunderclap. The 5 remaining people stood in the aftermath of the confrontation, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. King Charles sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. "William, we need to tell Catherine everything, and we need to make sure Charlotte never finds out how close she came to losing something that brings her so much joy." William nodded, his anger finally giving way to exhaustion and relief. "She's going to want to thank you all personally. What you did today, there's no way to properly express our gratitude." 3 days later, James Mitchell stood in the children's ward of Great Ormond Street Hospital, watching Princess Charlotte carefully distribute handmade books to young patients. Her face glowed with genuine happiness as she listened to each child tell her about their favorite stories. The visit that had almost been canceled was proceeding beautifully, exactly as it should have. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood nearby with tears in her eyes as she watched her daughter. When William had told her everything that had happened, Catherine had been devastated to learn how long the manipulation had been going on without their knowledge. But she had also been deeply grateful to the staff members who had protected Charlotte. "Thank you," Catherine had whispered to James when she first saw him after learning the truth. "Thank you for protecting our little girl when we didn't even know she needed protecting." Now, watching Charlotte's natural compassion shine as she comforted a young boy who was nervous about his upcoming surgery, James felt a deep satisfaction. This was why he had risked everything. This moment, this joy, this little girl's ability to bring happiness to others was worth every consequence he might have faced. Paul Morrison approached him quietly. "Any word from the palace about fallout from the confrontation?" James shook his head. "Nothing official, but Lady Susan mentioned that the Queen Consort has been keeping to her private apartments. No public appearances, no meetings with staff." "That won't last," Paul said grimly. "Someone like that doesn't just disappear quietly. She's planning something." As if summoned by their conversation, James's phone buzzed with a text from Lady Susan. "Return to palace immediately. Urgent situation developing." James felt his stomach drop. The hospital visit was nearly over, but he couldn't leave his post protecting Charlotte. He showed the message to Paul, who immediately radioed for backup protection officers. "Go," Paul said. "I'll handle security here until you get back." The drive back to Windsor Castle felt endless. James's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Had Camilla gone to the press? Had she found a way to retaliate against the staff who had exposed her? Had she convinced King Charles to reverse his decision? Lady Susan met him at the castle's staff entrance, her usual composed demeanor cracked with obvious worry. "What's happened?" James asked immediately. "The Queen Consort has scheduled a private meeting with several members of the press for this afternoon. She's claiming she has important information about security breaches within the royal household." James felt the world tilt around him. She's going to expose what happened. She's going to try to discredit us publicly. "It gets worse," Lady Susan continued as they walked quickly through the corridors. She specifically mentioned that certain staff members have been conducting unauthorized surveillance of family members and leaking private information. The implications hit James like a physical blow. Even though what he had done was right, listening to private conversations and reporting on them could be spun as a massive breach of trust. In the court of public opinion, Camilla could present herself as the victim of overzealous staff members who had overstepped their boundaries. They reached Lady Susan's office, where Paul Morrison was waiting with a grim expression. "I got your message and came straight back," Paul said. "How bad is this going to be?" Lady Susan closed the door and sat heavily in her chair. "If she's successful in spinning this as a staff rebellion against legitimate royal authority, it could destroy all of our careers and damage the Wales family in the process. The press loves a story about palace intrigue and betrayal." James sank into a chair, the weight of what he had started crashing down on him. "This is my fault. I should have found another way to handle what I overheard." "No," Paul said firmly. "You did exactly what you should have done. The fact that she's willing to go this far to cover up her own behavior just proves how wrong she was." There was a soft knock at the door, and all 3 of them tensed. Lady Susan called for whoever it was to enter, and they were surprised to see Prince William step into the room. "I heard about Camilla's planned press meeting," he said without preamble. "I wanted to speak with you all before things go any further." William looked tired but determined. He took a seat across from them, his posture reflecting the weight of royal responsibility. "First, I want you to know that my father and I have discussed this situation extensively. We are not going to allow Camilla to destroy your careers over doing the right thing." James felt a flicker of hope. "Sir, what does that mean exactly?" "It means that if she tries to publicly attack any of you, we will release a statement detailing exactly why you felt it necessary to bring this matter to our attention. The documentation you provided speaks for itself." Lady Susan leaned forward. "Your Royal Highness, that would mean airing very private family business in public. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" William's expression was resolute. "If that's what it takes to protect the people who protected my daughter, then yes. Catherine and I discussed it at length. We won't let you suffer for doing what we would have wanted you to do if we had known what was happening." Paul Morrison straightened in his chair. "Sir, there may be another option. What if we get ahead of this? What if we present the facts before she has a chance to spin them?" "What do you mean?" William asked. Paul pulled out his phone and showed them a message. "I've been in contact with the editor of the Times, someone I trust from my days in the Metropolitan Police. If we provide them with the full documentation and context, they could publish a factual account of what happened before Camilla's version reaches the public." Lady Susan looked thoughtful. "It's risky, but it might work. If the truth comes out first, properly contextualized, it's harder for someone to later claim victimhood." James felt overwhelmed by the support these people were showing him. "You would all risk your reputations to protect me?" William smiled for the first time since entering the room. "James, you risked your career to protect my 8-year-old daughter from being manipulated by an adult who should have known better. The least we can do is make sure you don't face consequences for that courage." Over the next 2 hours, they worked together to prepare a comprehensive account of what had happened. Lady Susan's meticulous documentation proved invaluable. Paul's law enforcement background helped structure the narrative, and William's insider knowledge ensured they presented the facts in a way that protected the monarchy while exposing the truth. The story that emerged was compelling and clear. Dedicated royal staff members had noticed a troubling pattern of unauthorized interference with a young princess's public duties, and had properly reported their concerns through appropriate channels. When confronted with evidence, the king had acted decisively to protect his granddaughter and support her parents' authority. By evening, the Times had published their account online. The headline read, "Royal Staff Act to Protect Princess Charlotte from Unauthorized Schedule Changes." The article presented the facts straightforwardly, emphasizing the staff's professionalism and the king's decisive response to protect his granddaughter. Camilla's planned press meeting was quietly canceled. 2 weeks later, James stood once again in the castle gardens, watching Princess Charlotte play with her brothers. The little girl was excited about an upcoming visit to a school for deaf children, where she would be learning some sign language to communicate with the students. Prince William approached, as he often did during his afternoon walks. "How are you feeling about everything?" William asked. James considered the question carefully. "Relieved, sir, and grateful. I was terrified that doing the right thing might end up hurting Princess Charlotte in the long run." "It didn't," William said firmly. "In fact, I think it taught all of us something important about the people we can trust to have our family's best interests at heart." In the distance, Charlotte waved at them, her face bright with the joy that had almost been taken away from her. James waved back, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with his career or his own well-being. He had protected a child's right to grow up confident and caring, surrounded by people who valued her happiness over political calculation. In the end, that was what really mattered. Camilla remained a part of the royal family, but her role in decisions affecting the grandchildren had been permanently curtailed. The king had made it clear that any future interference would have immediate and serious consequences, and Princess Charlotte continued to bring joy to everyone she met, blissfully unaware of how close she had come to losing that opportunity. Sometimes, James reflected, the most important battles were the ones that protected innocence from ever knowing it had been under attack.